Hi all, welcome to the first of several productions on Studio C and the SSL console here in the RAM department at MTSU. Over the course of these videos, we're going to be looking at everything from the ins and outs of the console and patch bay to synchronization with the multi-track decks and mixing from Pro Tools. So grab some popcorn, sit back with your feet up and take a few good notes, because here we go. Channel input section. To make things as clear as mud, let's skip over the large massive buttons at the top of the I/O module and move on to the next little section, which I like to affectionately call the channel input section. Sometimes I call it Sweetheart, but that's a whole nother story. Basically, in the input section, you can choose from one of three inputs: line, mic, or subgroup. The line level input can be used for line level sources, including multi-track tape outputs, keyboards, or effects devices. While it could also technically receive input from an elephant's trunk, I'm pretty sure you'd need some kind of A to D converter. Without switching to global statuses, we can switch the input feeding the channel input section by pressing the flip switch. This is indicated by the red light next to the microphone input gain knob. Red and green everywhere. Those Brits must sure be into Christmas. This knob can be turned up to provide up to 70 dB of gain for various types of microphones. The third input is the subgroup input, accessed by pressing, drumroll please, the subgroup button. This button derives its input from that module's group amplifier. For example, we're now on channel 23. As a result, any other module assigned to output 23 will show up here. The next button is a phase reverse button, which reverses the phase of the input signal 180 degrees. This is useful when you have multiple microphones on a single source and phase cancellation problems are occurring. Give this bad boy a flip and see if it doesn't settle the argument. The last button applies 48 volt phantom power to the microphone input for powering condenser microphones and active direct boxes. If you turn this on while most ribbon microphones are plugged into this module, well, congratulations! You now have a multi-$1,000 Christmas tree ornament. Dynamics section. The next stop on the channel strip choo-choo is the dynamics section. Its buttons and knobs are similar to all other compressors that you may use, but with a few special attributes. The ratio knob controls the amount of compression applied to all signals which exceed the level set by the threshold. When the ratio knob is turned all the way to the right, the compressor functions as a peak limiter. The release knob determines how quickly the compressor will stop compressing after the signal has fallen below the threshold. Like a drunken friend getting beat down in a bar, a fast release would stop beating him once he went down, while a slow release would give him a couple extra kicks once he's on the ground. You know, that's a good analogy. I think I'll use that in class. The two controls you don't find are an attack knob and a makeup gain knob. This is because the attack setting is fixed, but can be increased to a faster attack time by pulling up on the release knob. The SSL dynamics section is also equipped with an automatic makeup gain control, which will keep the compressor's output level equal to its input level. The link button tells the compressor on the channel to the right to follow the compression settings of the channel on the left. This is useful for stereo signals coming into two mono channel strips so that they're compressed in equal amounts. The metering for this compressor is found below on the red and yellow LEDs, which, as I know, you've been waiting, introduces a third color to the LED selections on the console. These show only the gain reduction of the compressor section though. The gate section, found below the compressor, can function as either a 2-to-1 expander, with the gate button in the up position, or as a traditional noise gate, with the gate button pressed down. Similar to the compressor, but exactly not, the threshold knob on the gate section sets the input level below which the gate will act. The range knob allows you to choose full noise gate or lesser amounts of expansion. Also, similar to the compressor, the attack time is fixed, but can be made faster by pulling up on the release knob. Metering is accomplished with the green LEDs, which will be fully lit when the gate is completely closed and the range knob is all the way up, and unlit when the gate is open. Kinda like those wireless mics whose red light comes on when the battery is dead. Regardless, the extra lights really serve to instill consumer confidence in your mixes. The dynamics section is put into either of the signal paths, the channel or monitor path, with a Dynamics 2 button. The Channel In button places a dynamics section into the channel path, after the preamp, but before the equalizer. The Channel Out button places a dynamics section after the equalizer, but before the channel output fader. The Monitor button places a dynamics into the monitor path, which we'll usually access with the large VCA fader, as I said before. EQ. Now we get to the cool stuff. If there's one section that you're just itching to abuse more than any other on this console, this is the one. Located right below the dynamics section is the filter section for your water, coffee, or oil. Basically, they allow you to use a steep high-pass or low-pass filter to eliminate all of the high-end or low-end off of your signal. If you're like most beginning engineers, your biggest mixing challenge will be having way too much low-end in your mixes. Judicious use of the low-pass filter can either help clean up some of this musical manure, or, taken too far, will have your musical cow neutered. I'm not sure where this analogy is going, so I'm just going to move on. These can be used in conjunction with a 4-band parametric EQ below, or they can be separated to just after the channel's input by using the split button. The top and bottom bands of the EQ section are a high and low shelving EQ. With their adjustable starting frequency, they can be used to add or cut everything from a shimmery air on the top end of your signal or some thunderous booty-shaking bass. It, like your other 3 bands of EQ on the channel strip, all have plus or minus 15 dB of gain for shaping your sound. Here's a squirrely little button that you won't find on many other consoles. The High-Mid x 3 button is here to make sure you don't forget all those hard-earned math skills that you developed in high school. Well, not really. It basically allows you to triple the frequency selected on the high-mid EQ. This allows you to use the high-frequency shelf to triple a setting of, say, 6 kHz, for example, to affect 18 kHz and above. So, in the event that you develop the hearing range of a dog or cave-dwelling bat, this will be really handy for touching up the frequencies us normal humans simply cannot hear. The low-mid divided by 3 button works similarly by allowing you to make a selection of 600 Hz on the low-mid frequency knob and dividing by 3 to make a boost or cut of 200 cycles per second. 600 divided by 3 is 200. Will you use these buttons a lot? No, probably not. Both the high-mid and low-mid sections also have adjustable center frequencies, as well as the 15 dB of gain to cut or boost. But get this. Named for the classic James Bond character, the 2 mid-bands have fully variable Q for creating very narrow filters for notching out problem frequencies, or villains, or very wide bells for adding body or cutting out muddy sounds. They're very handy. Similar to the dynamics section, the equalizer 2 buttons allow you to switch which path is affected by the EQ. The channel button will place the EQ into your channel path, which is typically feeding the tape machine. Or the monitor button will place it in the monitor path, so you can EQ signals coming back from tape during the mixdown process. In short, the channel button will send your EQ'd sound to the tape, while the monitor button will just EQ the sound coming back from tape while they're being mixed down. If you know exactly what kind of sound you're going for, by all means, you press that channel button with your bad self. Otherwise, just use the monitor button to EQ the tape returns, so when you, in a sleep-deprived stupor, really screw up your mix, you can fix it later. You'll thank me later too. The winner of the most abbreviated button on the console award is the Filters to Dynamics Sidechain button. Though printed in hieroglyphics, it allows you to switch the filter section into the dynamics section sidechain. This allows you to create a frequency-conscious gate or compressor for some unique effects. Insert section. In a true testament to British engineering and thinking, the all-knowing designers at SSL saw fit to sneakily hide the insert section in the middle of the equalizers on the SSL I/O module. Utilizing the insert sends and returns on the patch bay, you can patch outboard gear such as high-end compressors, gates, and EQs across the signal path. While the signal is always being sent out of the patch bay insert sends, the in button activates the insert return to receive the signal returning from the outboard device. In other words, if you don't press this button, you will not hear the affected signal. However, if you have one of those annoying artists trying to get you to strap a 3630 or some other piece of junk across their vocal, simply patch it in and don't press the insert in button. The 3630 will light up like a chain smoker at an AA meeting, but the terrible sound will not be returned to your wonderful mix. That tip is free, but the next one will cost you. Finally, while the default status of the console is to insert the device after the EQ section, the pre button will allow you to insert the device before the EQ for a different tonal approach. AUX Echo Sends. In a concentrated effort to confuse you even more thoroughly, our SSL 4000 is equipped with 1 stereo and 4 mono auxiliary sends. Auxiliary sends are what you're going to use for making headphone mixes, as well as to send signal to outboard effects devices such as reverbs and delays. As a result, we're going to give them several different names for no apparent reason, just like the roads here in Murfreesboro. If we're using them to create headphone mixes, we'll call them Q sends. If we're using them to send to any kind of effects processor, we'll call them echo sends, both in practice and on the patch bay, even if we're not sending to an echo. Other things this section will be called in the real world will include such mystery words as foldback, monitor mixes, AUXes, and Billy Bob. Okay, I made that last one up. Each send is activated by simply pressing it down and turning the knob clockwise. That's turning it to the right for those of you who've always had a digital watch. I know this sounds simple, but you have no idea how many people will just keep trying to turn it up and completely forget to press it down. Don't be that guy. They can easily be bypassed by pressing them again to restore them to an up position. This can be incredibly handy for A being the sound of a signal going to an effects unit versus the sound of a signal without any effects. Since they have a little more give than any other section of the console, they're also the most comfortable to catch a 10-minute nap on. Just watch out for console rash. Each of the sends can be switched to a pre-fader status by pressing the pre button. This is useful when creating Q mixes, as the amount of signal being sent will not be affected by the large VCA fader when the pre button is pressed. In other words, your mix won't affect what the musicians are hearing. That's a good thing. So even if you have to solo some tracks out while the band is playing, they won't lose themselves in their headphones. In addition, the Q's pan knob allows you to pan the signal between the left and right headphone channels of the 1 stereo auxiliary send. If the pre button is not pressed, then the amount of signal going to the send is affected by the large VCA fader. This is useful for creating a more realistic sound with reverbs and delays, as the amount being reverberated will increase or decrease with the level of the fader. Finally, if you wish to derive the signal from the small fader rather than the large VCA, simply press down the small fader button. I know, it should be obvious, but it's apparently not. If it ain't pressed, the AUX signal gets its sound from the VCA by default. Just when you thought we were done with buttons and knobs that were randomly added wherever SSL could fit them, the group trim knob makes its grand entry. This is the final gain control for all signals leaving the routing matrix. All signals bus to a particular group amp will first pass through this gain control before leaving the console. Generally, rather than using the group trim, you'll want to control the output of a signal going to a particular group amp via whichever fader is feeding the routing matrix. But if you don't want to screw up your balances, but a particular group is overloading, by all means, turn this knob down a notch or two. In another feat of British 2-for-1 engineering, the group trim knob also acts as the solo isolate button for a given channel. Yep, simply pulling up this knob will keep that module from being muted when another module is soloed. Think Rebel Rambo module that refuses to be muted by its masters and oppressors. Anyway, this is most commonly used when a particular module is being used as an effects return, to keep the reverb returns activated at all the time, even when other modules are soloed. In other words, when you solo that snare track that is also being sent to a bit of reverb, this will keep the reverb signal coming back into the mix, even when you solo the snare. Contrary to popular belief, the float button has nothing to do with root beer, or regular beer for that matter. However, it is used for bouncing, ping-ponging, or creating a submix to a spare pair of tracks. Basically, it disengages the channel fader from feeding the group amps, and instead sends the monitor fader's output to the routing matrix instead of the quad bus. This allows you to route the outputs of the monitor faders back out to an empty pair of tracks on your tape machine, and submix multiple tracks down, leaving those tracks that you just submixed now free to re-record over. Stick with me. If you've ever done this on a 4-track tape recorder, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't know what a 4-track tape recorder is, well, all hope is lost in explaining this button. The direct button is a fun one, and one that you'll use quite regularly. It can be used rather than the routing matrix for sending a signal directly to that module's group amp, and as a result, directly to that numbered track of tape. For example, if the direct button is pressed on channel 24, its output will go directly to group amp 24, and then to track 24 on the multitrack. The same goes for channels 1 to 23. You can think of this as your I don't even want to think about routing button. The benefits are that this gives a cleaner, quieter signal with a better noise floor because it doesn't go through the extra gain stage of the routing matrix. And you should use it when you can. Monitor input section. Now that we're really moving along, the Ready Group and Ready Tape button make up what we call the monitor input section. By pressing one or both of them, you can choose whether you're hearing the signal before it goes out to the multi-track recording deck or after it returns. Simple, right? The Ready Group button picks up its signal at that channel's group output, hence the name Ready Group. It lets you hear what your signal is like right after all your channel settings, like EQ, compression, gating, but before it goes out to tape. This way, the engineer does not have to loop the signal back around through the tape machine before hearing it. I know. As you're sitting there with that bewildered look on your face, you're asking, why do I want to use the Ready Group button again? Well, pretty much any recording device will alter the sound of the signal in some way, even if it's subtle. As a result, if you want to check what your signal sounds like right before it leaves the console, you can temporarily press this button. It's useful for tracking and overdubs, or when you just want to hear what your signal sounds like before going to tape. There, better? The Ready Tape button is used to listen to the output of the tape machine coming back into the recording console. This is the normal way you will listen to your tracks and signals coming back from tape, just like for every mixdown. The red record arm button is not used in our SSL console setup, but if it were, it would be really cool and would be used for record arming tracks on the tape machine. These are not in any way related to the big red button that the president presses to launch nuclear war. You can press them in fun combinations though if you feel like it will impress your client more. Small fader. As they say, people with small faders also tend to have small hands, right? As we discussed previously, the small fader can be used in either the channel or monitor path, depending on the global status selected. Again, it will typically be our channel fader in both mix and record plus VCA to monitor status. As you can see from the super small type, the From Channel Input button will get the small fader's input from the channel path right after the mic pre or line amp, but before the large VCA fader or EQ. Get it? The From Channel Input button gets its signal from the channel's input. Let that sink in for a minute so I don't get this question 100 times in class. The From Channel Output button will take its output from where? Right, from the channel's output. You're catching on quick. To be more precise, it gets its signal after the large VCA fader and after the EQ section. Now, just to throw another monkey wrench into the works, pressing both the input and output buttons will take the signal from before the large VCA fader, but after the EQ section. This is just something you have to memorize, so deal with it. And of course, you can solo or cut the small faders just like the large faders. The small CFB pan knob is used for panning between the center, front, and back speakers when the console is set up for quad surround sound. Since we don't make use of its quad surround capabilities, you won't have any use for this. You can turn it around and around if you feel like it though. Routing matrix. The routing matrix was invented by Keanu Reeves, shortly after his and Bill's excellent adventure.
Excellent!
It's found at the top of the I/O module and has 32 group amplifier or bus outputs, in addition to outputs for routing to the quad bus. It is used to select the outputs for the channel path to send to either the multitrack deck, a subgroup amp, or even external effects units via the patch bay. Don't worry, all this stuff will start to make sense in labs. In addition, a pan button and knob makes it easy to pan between even and odd tracks on your multitrack deck. This is useful for a variety of tracking and mixing situations. For example, for creating a stereo mix of multiple tracks of background vocals to only 2 tracks of tape. One could simply assign each of 4 background vocal channels to a pair of open tracks, then create the stereo mix by using the pan knob to put them at different locations in the stereo field. This can also be useful for submixing drum kits, tom-toms, overheads, or even bouncing down sections of orchestral instruments. All together now.
Excellent!
The large VCA fader is what we will typically be using to create our mixdown in either mixdown or record plus VCA to monitor mode. Like all consoles, this main fader has a solo button, a cut mute button, and a large pan knob for panning between the main left and right buses and hence the stereo field. If this is still a foreign concept to you, now would be a good time to start questioning your choice of careers. Using the VCA assignment wheel, we can slave any of the 32 VCA faders to any of 8 VCA master volume faders in the center section of the console. This lets you control the overall volume of a group of instruments and faders with only one master VCA. For example, by setting all of my drum tracks to VCA group 8, I can then control the overall drum level of my mix by simply raising or lowering the level of master VCA fader number 8. The same could be used with groups of vocals, guitars, instruments, etc. A very cool mix technique regardless. Well, I hope you've enjoyed learning about the SSL console with us today. Check us out again later for some more in-depth coverage on the patch bay, timecode, compression, mixing, EQ, and other fun issues in the world of recording. We'll see you later.